Welcome to Whole Health. We're happy you're here on this journey of exploration with us as we learn what it means to live a life dedicated to spiritual, mental, and physical health. Before we begin our program, we want to share a brief legal disclaimer. The information provided on this program, including any health-related advice or discussions, is for general informational purposes only and should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional before making any decisions regarding your health. Now, let's turn it over to Pastor Jeremy, Dr. Kala Kleen, and Brittany Pfeiffer for today's episode of Whole Health.
All right, guys, welcome back to Whole Health, and today's episode is a big one. We're going to break down two major reports that came out in 2025, the Make Our Children Healthy Again assessment and the full strategy that followed it. And honestly, this is one of the clearest looks we've ever had at what's actually happening to health in the U.S., starting with kids, but really affecting all of us. What we're going to do today is walk through how bad things really are, and quite frankly, it's pretty bad, what's driving it, and the plan to turn it all around. Before we get into the numbers and the strategy, I think it's important to zoom out for a second and answer a bigger question. What actually is the MAHA movement? Because a lot of people, when they hear the phrase, make America healthy again, they immediately think, well, this has got to do something with politics. But really, at its core, this movement is about something much more important than politics. It's about truth. It's about helping people make informed decisions again. And it's about getting back to the idea that health should be built on what actually helps human beings thrive. When you look at the MAHA documents, one of the big themes is that Americans deserve clear, actionable, evidence-based guidance around food and around health. Not confusing messaging, not half-truths, not systems that reward symptom management while the population keeps getting sicker. The scientific report says the goal is to give Americans guidance that helps them choose foods that support health and reduce chronic illness and disease, and it centers the guidance on minimally processed, naturally nutrient-dense foods. Honestly, that matters because right now the average person is drowning in noise. One headline might say low fat. Another one will say, well, this is plant-based. And then another even high protein. Some say calories are all that matters. Another might say it doesn't matter what you eat as long as you take the right medications. And what MAHA is trying to say is, hold on a minute. Let's get back to the principles first. What is food supposed to do in the body? What kinds of foods actually nourish us? What kinds of foods are clearly driving disease? And how do we give people enough honest information to make decisions for themselves and for their families? And so, Brittany, we're going to start with you. Can you just help us to unpack all of this?
Yeah, and I think that was such a great point to make because, like you said, when people hear MAHA, they just think politics.
Right.
But truly, this is just such a great, we'll link it, the document that you could read through and just get all these really great stats, just information. Just truly, that's what we're here to do today is just provide information. We're not going to get political. We're just this is what's going on. This is what America's looking like.
Although I don't mind getting political.
Yeah, but if you do mind, but the whole point of this is just bringing back informed consent, which I think is kind of a general theme throughout this whole radio show is we just want people to make informed decisions and not be confused, but not just in medicine but everyday life. So you can't make informed choices if your labels you're reading are confusing. There's a lot of greenwashing. If you go to the grocery store, you're like, this is they spend tons of money to make it look like their products are better than they are. So marketing in the food industry is extremely misleading. The research is extremely influenced by the industry. It's money, right? Is kind of the root of all of this, evil in this environment.
And they have marketing firms that, help them figure out what to say and the way to say it. And I think that's part of the problem is it's so difficult to read through the information on the label to actually see what's there.
Exactly. So people who are trying to do better may not actually be doing better just because of all this misinformation. Right. And a lot of people were never taught what real food even looks like in the first place. So when they try it, they don't even know what they're looking for. So that's why I think this conversation matters a lot. So our goal is to to inform people regarding the kind of the vibe of this one is like chronic childhood diseases and the crisis. We're going to use clear facts, provide recommendations, but just as kind of an overview, not like, here's what the government wants you to do, because there's a lot of distrust in the government. So you don't have to see, a lot of people might see like the government put this out, I'm not going to believe it. Right? But this is kind of just like, here's what we know. This is what's driving disease. This is what the data is showing. And we just want to be honest with people. So one of the most practical pieces of that education is around real food. For a lot of family, real food sounds simple, but it's kind of has to be relearned at this point. I know I have some more distant family members, and they've talked about like, their kiddos have always struggled with weight. And we're like, just talking about like, what do you eat? And almost every meal is like pastas and like breads and stuff. And like, there's very little protein and very little like nutrition. Like, well, I threw a little bit of broccoli in, but
it's like the yellow plate with ketchup.
Yeah.
It's
just very
color.
beige.
And soda with every meal.
Yeah. And they truly like she's super really nice lady. Like I said, she's my family. I love her, but she literally had no idea that like she was not giving her kids meaningful nutrition. And now as adults, they don't know what that looks like because they were never taught it. So they're having to relearn, and like they have these health problems that they're having to deal with because their whole life they've been eating like the beige plate. So
and we all know people like that. Some of us are people like that. So,
absolutely. So we'll be kind of referencing, it's called realfood.gov. If you want to go there, it's got a lot of information, all the stats and things like that, nice. But it's built around the idea of minimally processed, nutrient-dense food should be the reference point. So that means veggies, fruits, meats, eggs, nuts, dairy. We don't need to criminalize dairy and fats like we always have. Whole grains, beef, or beans, seafood, things like that. Those should be the foundation. That's what we should be eating. And if you go to the website, it's got the new food pyramid, which is fantastic.
Yeah, isn't that
beautiful?
It really is
beautiful.
Amazing.
Yeah. So that's for people who, really truly don't know what should I be eating. It's a really great guide of like, this is what, like the proportions are a lot more accurate for what you actually need now. So it's just a big mind shift for what it used to be to what it is now. So instead of asking now, like, how do I hit a macro target or whatever it's easiest, it's starting, what's actual food? What is it made of? What's it doing to the body?
Right. And I think this is where a really important concept comes in. We hear the phrase all the time, food is medicine. And I love that phrase. But for a lot of people, it can sound kind of trendy and even pretty vague. And so, Dr. Calla, when we say that, what does it actually mean? And how does that connect to what we're seeing happen across the country right now?
Yeah, so the phrase food is medicine, it can sound trendy, but it really just means that food is not neutral. Food can be information, and it is our building blocks. Food and our fuel, the things that we choose to put in our body, it becomes our hormones, our neurotransmitters, cell membranes, energy production, and immune signaling. So our nutrition or our fuel sourcing is one of the most significant factors influencing health because the nutrients we eat provide the energy and alter the structure and metabolic function of our bodies and brains. And depending on the food choices we make, those nutrients either promote health or increase chronic disease. So one of the easiest analogies I talk about is the car compared to the human body. So God made the human body, and it is the most magical machine on the planet, hands down. We shiver when we're cold, we sweat when we're hot. We don't have to think about our heart beating. All of these things are all occurring. But if we take a car and we put water in the gasoline tank, your car might get not even a block before it is completely wrecked. And not just starting from the gas, but you've probably jacked up the engine, the carburetor. I mean, there's so many things that have gone wrong by putting the wrong fuel into that vehicle. Right. So that's kind of the analogy that I like to use. Like our body can function for a long time on highly processed chemical frankenfood for a long time, but it doesn't mean it's functioning well.
Right.
But God created our body to adapt to what we put in it. So when we say food is medicine, we're not just saying food replaces every medical intervention, but it can be, our best medicine or our slowest poison. So food can be, when we look at it, if we have poor fuel or poor food choices, like what we reference as highly processed frankenfoods, it's going to lead to diseases and creating insulin resistance, obesity, fatty liver, can fuel cardiovascular disease and brain health. So even long-term health span and lifespan, all dependent on the type of quality of food that we have. So again, food can be our best medicine or be the reason why people actually need medicine in the first place. And again, I'll say that again, another way to view food as your best medicine or your slowest poison. So when we talk about the food and the quality of the type of food, it's the biggest levers affecting health. So what we have to remember, too, among our healthcare providers, usually in the conventional realm, they learned biochemistry, which is our fats, carbs, and proteins, and how our body absorbs those fats, carbs, and proteins, and then we create energy and ATP. Right. That's kind of like the basics, but that's, med school, pre-med school. But then they get very little training on then like an actual nutrition from, what does protein, what does macros, unless they go into like a metabolic health program. So a lot of times our medical authority with the prescription pad actually knows very little about this realm. And so then we do really rely on the more allopathic and, complementary and alternative providers because they have had years upon years from a metabolic health standpoint. And I think that's what's made some of this somewhat confusing. We've had organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics that I think it was like 8 years ago finally reversed the recommendation to have 9 to 12 servings of juice.
Oh, wow.
And it was to compensate for not eating fruits and vegetables. It was the cheaper alternative. And I'm like, I can't believe it took this long to realize that very information was causing childhood obesity and type 2 diabetes in these kids because it was all sugar, right? But throughout most of human history, diets are built around mainly minimally processed plant and animal foods, and that modern populations who continue eating that way have remarkably low rates of chronic diseases and longer lifespans. When we look at the European countries compared to the United States, they're getting their fresh food on the way home from because they're walking to their jobs or riding their bike, and the markets are everywhere. Where in the United States, our food supply has undergone this rapid industrialization and replacing many traditional foods with highly processed products and refined oils, sugars, starches, and chemical additives.
A lot of the stuff that's in our food in this country is illegal in other countries. And I think that's one of the first things when my wife and I visited Ireland. It was culture shock to some degree. You see people, like you said, walking everywhere. I think that's a component that is so overlooked, and we've talked about that movement and the need for movement, but people being willing to just have a little refrigerator and not freeze everything and not need all of the boxes in the cupboards that have all of the preservatives. It's a very different world out there than what we're experiencing in this country. Most Americans don't know that.
Sure. Well, and I know too, for some of us, that we have fallen victim to the highly processed, the convenience food, that if majority of your food is coming from the pantry and it doesn't expire for a really long time. The goal is the next time that you're going to the grocery stores, walking on the outer, walking on the out perimeter, very minimally on the inside perimeter. And again, when we look at the consumption, 2/3 of the energy consumed in the U.S. is coming from processed foods in the beverages. The beverage industry is the biggest one that we see. And we do know that 70% of the American children's calories are now coming from ultra-processed foods. And, some of the school lunches even, which is sponsored by our government, which is part of some of this government distrust, right? And so I'm looking forward to what we continue to see with the MAHA movement. But what the MAHA movement is trying to do is truly a massive re-engineering of the American diet. And the concern is not just calories. When we were eating real food, it was a calorie overconsumption, but it was at least real food and nutrient dense. Now we have people who are actually potentially calorie starved, but they're carbohydrate overloaded and there's no nutrients in that. But what we're looking to do, or what MAHA movement is trying to do, is shifting that we don't see the nutrient depletion. We're addressing the refined starches and the added sugars, the extracted oils, and the chemical additives. Hyper palatable foods that drive overconsumption. So one of those is like the aspartame and the fake sugars and sweet. They have found, and it's been done multiple times in multiple studies, that you might have a sugar-free diet, but they're seeing that sugar-free, it's canceling the satiation signaling. So they're finding that even though you're eating sugar-free, those people are actually having an overconsumption because they're not getting the satiation. So they think that they're eating healthier, but their brain has been misled and hijacked. But when people say that we're seeing so much obesity and diabetes, brain fog, gut dysfunction, inflammation, and chronic disease, we cannot honestly talk about the American health without honestly addressing the American food supply. And I think this connects to a bigger theme that runs throughout this entire movement, which has a lot to do with trust. But this isn't just about food. It's about people wanting to feel confident that the recommendations that they're being given, so whether it's around nutrition, medication, or public health, they're truly grounded in clear and unbiased and evidence-based information. But when Brittany and I were prepping for this topic, this topic and our framework of our scripting is really based on what is the MAHA movement doing. But I know that there's a lot of headlines from various credentialed organizations that are having pushback. And so when the readers read those same highlights, I want people to take a magnifying glass of like, why are they objecting? I think most people, when they read this, they're like, this seems common sense. Why is there pushback in it? And I think it has a lot to do with the pharmaceutical and medication pushback.
Well, there's so much money in big pharma. And if we clean up the American diet, there's going to be a lot less need for a lot of the medications that people these days can't live without.
Yes.
And so it makes a lot of sense that there's a ton of pushback, but it's that pushback that should cause us to push back.
Yeah.
And, make that realization that, this is the right way to live. And we need to pursue that regardless of what, the powers that be might want us to believe.
Well, and our goal, if we use food as medicine, the goal is to not need medicine, but to not need to go to the doctor in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
amen.
Yes, I like this topic because it's not like one of the documents is like make our children, but it's not just for kids. It's just for the good of all because, we have sick kids become sick adults, right? Like we just continue that as we grow up if we've never learned the principles that we need to learn and we're just continuing the same issues. And those sick adults are now raising families inside the same broken food environments. Right. So it just kind of perpetuates generation after generation. So in this report, it talks that the U.S. is in a largely preventable epidemic with about 72% of adults having excess body weight, 41% meeting criteria for obesity, 14% are diabetic, 43% are pre-diabetic, and also 36% of youth have excess body weight, and 21% meet the criteria for obesity. Like this is a big, these are big numbers. These are not just, little something to just, oh, well, some kids are making bad choices or haven't been taught well. This is a big epidemic that's happening, and it's just getting worse. If you look at the trends and you look, it's every year bigger, like higher. It's we're not reversing this by any means yet. So this is not just for parents with young kids. It's not just for people who care about their health. Like this is for everyone. Everyone should be interested in nutrition because we have a lot of people that come in that have they've seen their primary care and they feel horrible and none of their labs were bad enough to warrant anything. So nothing was done until then they come to see us and we're like, there's so many things like foundationally that we have to work on because they haven't been taught and they just don't feel well. Like people, unfortunately, by the time unless you're really into health and wellness, by the time people who've never done that before come to see us, they are almost hopeless. They've done all the things and they're just like, I'm just willing to try anything because I feel so bad. So we literally sit and we teach these foundational principles of like what you need to eat, how to move your body, and we'll run labs to see like what we can do to help support them because if your vitamins are completely tanked, you need some support. Our goal isn't that people are on 47 supplements forever, but some people truly, if they have a poor diet, they're so depleted across the board that they need that extra support to get them to where they can be. And then we're like, okay, now let's eat real food. Let's move our bodies. Let's sleep.
Getting our vitamins and our minerals from our foods. But until we can get to that point, we do have to supplement those things. And I think there's a lot of confusion in that regard as well. But, it's interesting because with the healthcare system the way that it is, I don't think that my doctor has really talked to me about these kinds of issues. I had to find you guys, so that we could have these conversations. And I remember looking back several years ago, this is actually over a decade ago, I was trying to have this conversation with a doctor that I was seeing at that time. And he wasn't willing to have the conversations. He didn't have the knowledge to have the conversations and was pushing back against it. And then I realized that, and I'm not trying to be offensive, but he was wildly overweight.
Right.
And I'm sitting in his office thinking, how am I sitting here taking, health advice from somebody who is clearly not thinking health for himself? And so I found a new provider and ultimately, have worked towards, really the functional medicine process primarily because of that, because in the medical community, these kinds of things are so avoided. And that's why when you guys interact with so many people, they're so confused about why their body is doing what they're doing because for years and years and years, they've been taught, well, this is okay. Eat McDonald's every day and, all of these things. And, foregoing real health matters.
I remember when I was in college, one of my professors was talking about a study that showed that they were saying the source of the calorie doesn't matter, only calories matter. And they were like pulling up a study, and it was completely outrageous because they're like, this guy literally only ate Kit Kats. And like, like 1,500 calories versus this other person who ate like nutrient dense 15. And they're like, the guy who only ate Kit Kats lost weight. We're like, yeah, because he ate 4 Kit Kats in the day. Like that's all he, you know what I mean? So just like, I remember being taught that and sitting in class, and I didn't know anything about anything functional medicine, thinking like, I don't think this is right.
Right.
You know? And so that's why I think like this movement, I don't really like the term movement because I think it gets a little, but I think this is important because it's not, what's helpful is it's not just telling people to eat better, because a lot of people don't even know what that means, but it's like telling people, here's the data, here's the truth, teaching what real food is, making guidance more actionable, hopefully educating more providers so they can be that person unlike that provider was for you, and helping them to understand like prevention does matter. We don't want to wait. Most of the time you go to the doctor, and if you're not bad enough, like that's too bad. Like that's all they really know how to help you with. So once people can understand that the food is not just calories and they're not created equal, they can hopefully see why this matters so much.
And I think that's the heart of it, you know, calling America back to some basic truths, that the body works best when it's nourished well, that, you know, prevention matters, that real food still matters, that people deserve honest information, and that informed choices get easier when the guidance is actually clear. So before we even get into the crisis numbers, that's the frame for this whole conversation. This really is about rebuilding a culture where people understand that what they eat every day is shaping their future, and where real health starts getting treated like something worth protecting. So with that foundation in place, Brittany, let's talk about just how serious this has become. You know, when you look at the report, how big of a problem are we actually dealing with?
It's a lot more bigger than most people realize. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom here, but I think having the data is important. People can see like why this does matter. So just going to go through some stats here. Over 40% of children in the U.S. now have at least one chronic health condition. That's a huge amount.
That's a huge number.
Like we have these kiddos who are just starting out, and like once we have one chronic health condition, we are more prone to have more, right? And go ahead.
Sorry, and from my observation, you know, some people say, oh, it's a socioeconomic differential, and it's not.
No.
It really isn't. I know plenty of very, very high income, you know, children and adults that are falling into this same category as well. Because a lot of times we'll see that in the negative headlines, that this is going to create further discouragement from the socioeconomic and create a divide. And that's some of the headlines. They're trying to change even like the food stamp benefits to reducing the sugary foods to having more incentive on the real foods. And there's even pushback about that.
Oh my goodness.
You know, as an anti-MAHA movement. So from a critical thinking standpoint, we got to read those headlines and read through the nitty gritty. But Brittany, I didn't mean to interrupt there.
No, you're good. But when we talk like chronic health conditions, like, you know, people might be like, what does that mean? Things like asthma, allergy, obesity, autoimmune conditions, ADHD, and behavioral concerns. Those are a lot of times are rooted in like nutrient deficiencies, and just poor nutrition can contribute to those symptoms so much. So this is not just a handful of kids. This is almost half the kids out there are having a chronic condition. So another thing that really stood out, over 75% of young adults are not eligible for military service. That is a huge number.
That's a national threat to our safety and security.
That really is scary.
Due to things like poor metabolic health, mental health challenges, low physical fitness, like we don't even have enough people like to help.
That's kind of scary.
So this is not just affecting people now, but future populations. Childhood obesity, more than 1 in 5 kids are obese. That's a 270% increase since the 1970s.
Oh my goodness.
Severe obesity is up over 500%. About 80% of those kids stay obese into adulthood. So these kids now are these, you know,
habits are hard to break.
Yeah.
You know, so when you're taught a certain way of life, it's hard to get out of that without somebody coming along and teaching you how to do that. And I love that that's what your guys' hearts are.
Yeah. So these, these basically are just sick adults earlier. In the 1980s, type 2 diabetes in kids was almost non-existent. Now we're looking at over 350,000 children diagnosed, and prediabetes is more than 1 in 4 teens. Wow. And adults are seeing 1 in 3 with prediabetes, widespread insulin resistance, which is not even probably accurate because most doctors don't even check an insulin level. You have to, I know we had the guest speaker on, and she was talking about like, you have to specifically request that. You don't even know until your A1C gets, you know, is wildly high, or your fasting glucose, but that insulin resistance can start much, much earlier. So just a ton of metabolic diseases, neurodevelopmental conditions, autism, 1 in 31 kids, ADHD is over 10% of kids. And these a lot of times will evolve into adults who have challenges with like anxiety, depression, burnout, mental health struggles. Depression in teens has nearly doubled.
Right.
More than 1 in 14 girls report a major depressive episode, and suicide is now the second leading cause of death in teens.
Oh, it breaks my heart.
Yeah. And so like all of this is information that I don't think people know. Like it's not widespread. So that's why I like that we're doing this episode, just raising awareness of like, this is really important. Even if you look, like let's say you're a parent, you're looking at your kids like, yeah, they're pretty healthy, but like, are you doing your best to make sure they can grow up to be really healthy adults, really well functioning? If I don't even think we're touching on this, but like fertility is on the decline across the board. So like, are you making sure that your kids, when they grow up, can have kids, right? Like these are things that our parents probably didn't even have to think about at all, but just the shift in our environment and our foods and medications and all of the things that we have to deal with, especially here in Iowa.
Right. More and more. Yeah.
Yeah. So going on to allergies and autoimmune things, 1 in 4 kids has allergies. I see lots of kids who come in who have allergies or food sensitivities. And it is amazing if they have parents who are able to bring them in and they get tested and we are able to, create new diet plans and start like some gut support, the difference. I had a kiddo who almost got kicked out of school because he had these major behavior. We did this, revamped his diet completely, and his parents he's a completely new kid.
Wow, that's
just
awesome.
Diet alone and a little bit of supplements to have some gut support, and he's back to being like, they're like, this is the kid I knew previously.
That's awesome.
And so so most important takeaway from this, it's not genetics. This is environmentally driven, preventable things across kids, adults, all of it.
So it's not just about kids, it's really about the trajectory of overall health. Dr. Calla, can you walk us through that? What's actually driving all of this? Because it can be confusing.
Yeah, so kind of getting into the heart of the root causes. So across the board, we keep repeating that food or ultra-processed diet. And so to help patients discern ultra-processed food, we can even have deli meat, and that has become ultra-processed. If your deli meat is good, in the fridge for more than 7 days. It is, there's been additives to keep it shelf stable. So nearly 60% of our calories in both kids and adults are coming from those ultra processed foods. But then there's 3 major issues with that. First, we have nutrient depletion. Second, we have the overconsumption. And the third, we have the additives that then lead to gut disruption. So from the nutrient depletion standpoint, so oftentimes we'll see that patients might be eating enough calories, but it's the wrong macro content. So we really help patients really look at the protein, the fats, and the carbs. And oftentimes we'll see a significant consumption of the carbs and not carbs from fruits and vegetables. We're lacking those types of carbs, AKA the real food, but then we're seeing the reliance on the crackers, pastas, breads that are really filling, they're high calorie, but very low protein. And that protein, we have to get what's our amino acids is from a protein diet. So patients that have a plant-based diet, they have to have such a wide variety in order to get that amino acid content. Vegans in Iowa, I often tell them that, hey, from my perspective, you will probably have to supplement with amino acids because I have not been able to see somebody on a vegan, 100% real plant-based diet do it to get the metabolic need of the protein consumption. But if we are eating animal meat, and that's why we are pro animal meat, to get that protein and those macros. But the overconsumption, as I was saying, that higher carb on the pastas, breads is really driving that blood sugar dysregulation and then fueling those cravings to keep eating that same beige palette of a diet.
Right.
But then when we talk about like the additives and the gut disruption, I know that buying organic is not necessarily, it doesn't seem like it's upfront cost effective, but to really support your microbiome and reducing the inflammation in your brain function, those pesticides really are wreaking havoc, and there's more and more evidence that is showing that stuff is poison. And then leading into then more of the environmental toxins, the plastics, the pesticides, and the known endocrine disruptors. So in adults, we'll see this show up as hormone imbalances, thyroid dysfunction, infertility, and fatigue. Some of the biggest things are what we call like the phytoestrogens. And then again, even like in perfumes and like the Glade plugins and stuff like that, we can see it in labs where we'll get synthetic estrogens to pop up in patients, and that's creating a lot of issues. But then just the lifestyle, that low movement, high screen time, The screen time in adults, we see even like the dopamine surge of the social media and the numbing out it is wrecking metabolic havoc, leading and fueling poor sleep. So in kids, we'll see that behavior and focus. In adults, they'll present with the weight gain, the burnout and metabolic dysfunction. Then with the lack of sleep, it's going to further disrupt the blood sugar regulation, going to desensitize you to feeling full. You're always going to feel hungry. And then we've got the over-medicalization. And what we've seen in that industry is that they've normalized all of this dysfunction.
Right.
And is what it is. It's very, very common, but it doesn't mean that that's, metabolically normal. So through this, the MAHA movement, it's a layered through corporate corporate influence, which all impacts then the research, the food systems, and the healthcare priorities. So we've built and relied on a system that treats the disease instead of preventing it.
And that really kind of sets up the next question perfectly. If that's the problem, what's actually being done about it? And so, Brittany, maybe walk us through the strategy.
Absolutely. This is actually the exciting part, because it's not just vague recommendations, which I think would not be helpful at all. It's not like just eat better food, move your body. That's kind of a little bit what we do sometimes on this. But this has 120 specific initiatives focused on prevention and actually addressing root causes, which I think that's the first time that the government has ever done this.
Right. That's pretty helpful.
Yeah. So this is helpful for everyone. So there's different pillars. The first one is research. It's going to talk about improving the quality of research of science that we're using to make decisions. So one of the biggest issues right now is a lot of research is industry funded, so a little biased, and not focused on long-term outcomes, right? So what they're proposing is large-scale nutrition trials comparing whole foods versus ultra-processed diets. That's, I don't think, ever been done before.
Right.
All of this is really exciting because we always think like, studies and things like that are funded with money, right? We're like trying to fund a new medication or a new, like, this is just for the good of the people. So like that's like really encouraging. Deeper research into the gut microbiome and metabolic health. Again, like I think those are words that weren't even talked about until like the last 10, 15 years. Like people, if you said microbiome, people probably didn't even know what you're talking about.
Course.
And so that's great because we're like that. We always talk about, I always tell patients, the gut is not sexy. No one wants to talk about it, but it is so crucial. So this is fantastic that we're actually diving into this. Also studying long-term effects on medications in children and using real world data like wearables and labs and like tracking environmental exposures. So they're even looking at things like AI to detect early disease trends. AI kind of scares me a little bit, but I think this might actually be a good use of it. So things like that. And then in testing on humans more instead of just relying on animal data. So a lot of this is getting to the true root cause and not just, we're focusing on long-term health here. We're really trying to figure out how do we help this next generation to not continue to have those trends increase like every single year. The second pillar, system changes. So this is about changing the environment people are living in and not just telling them, be healthier. So on the food side, they're looking at like clearly labeling the ultra-processed foods so you can make better choices, improving the front of package labels so you can choose quicker. So sometimes if I'm trying to make a choice, I'm sitting there and I'm like, it is actually hard to figure out which one of these is the better option. And I know more what I'm looking for than the average person does.
Right.
So this hoping to help, get past those loopholes around the greenwashing, things like that. So people don't think
clear, like grading scale would be nice, where there was just
like an A+.
Or even a 1 to 10, 10 being the healthiest.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
I mean, the map for that grading system would be intense, but it's so hard to read through some of that with, as parents of 3 kids with a variety of different food allergies and things, we've become so accustomed to reading and rereading, and then you just start to go, I want to eat food that doesn't have a label. Where's the fresh? And then to Dr. Calla's point, if you stay on the outside of the grocery store, you got less labels to read and a lot healthier food to eat.
Absolutely. Another part of this is phasing out certain synthetic food dyes. So again, we talked about how like other countries, they don't even have these, like they're legal. Yep. So we're finally jumping on that bandwagon, improving school lunches and just kind of supporting farming practices that improves our nutrient density. I know we've talked in the past about soil quality and things like that. So they're focusing on really start to finish here. So that's very encouraging. On the healthcare side of things, there's a big shift because we talked about how doctors are not really trained. A lot of these, they get very little nutrition information. So we're talking about rewarding instead of rewarding like volume and prescriptions and, getting
Right.
bonuses for that type of thing,
absurd.
they're going to look at improving metabolic health, increasing physical activity, reducing chronic disease markers, and funding models that support lifestyle medicine, nutrition intervention, like whole person care. So what we do hopefully will now be the standard, right?
And I hope it like in better partnership.
Right.
Jill is our physician assistant, and today we had a mutual patient, and he was on my books, and she just went to swing by to say hi to him, and she's got the cardiovascular emergency medicine
nice.
background, and she's like, "Hey, what's going on? What's new?" Just in short conversation, he's like, "Oh, I'm here to talk to CJ about my AFib," and Jill was like, "What do you mean your AFib?" And like, what's CJ, the chiropractor functional medicine doctor, going to
Right.
do with your electrical physiology problem of your heart? And it's one of those things I'm not offended. And Jill and I have such a great relationship. And so it was funny. I was like, well, let's go back and talk about this together. And he's like, well, I wanted to talk about, do I need to go get this ablation? I tried to do the cardiovert. And anyway, so we just had this really great, healthy conversation. And she's like, hey, this is a little bit more my lane for what he needs, going through. But we had such a great conversation. Ultimately, we encouraged him in the last 18 months, so he's had AFib since 2021.
Oh, wow.
Recently just had an EKG and a cardiac stress test, and his heart health has stabilized and stayed the same. He has not gotten worse, but he didn't want to do something invasive if he didn't need to, right? And he's like, well, the doctor said I didn't need it. And through me and Jill's conversation, I was like, hey, this is a corrective procedure. There's a chance maybe it won't work, but to correct how your heart is beating is really important for your brain health, your gut health. Like, it's going to be more efficient. This is a corrective procedure that's very minimally invasive compared to stents and bypass, relative. Like, is it still, something for risk versus benefits? But I was like, but your metabolic health compared to where you were at 18 months ago, you're in way better shape to have way better outcomes now compared to if you just would have had the ablation when you were, 60 pounds heavier and having the processed diet that you've had.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And so I look more forward to like this movement of like, this is so great to create the partnership of the lane of medicine and the lane of preventative or, trying to improve health outcomes. And that's what I'm really excited about for this movement, for the patient or the conventional doctors that are going to embrace it as well.
It's one of the things I love about what you guys have going on at Back in Line. You really cover so many spectrums of health. And if you guys are out there looking for some corrective health measures, I'd highly encourage you to get in touch with these ladies.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on. Pillar 3 is public awareness. So most families right now are trying to do the right thing, but they just don't have the information, right? Or they have tried to seek out the information and they just are not getting it. So this one is helpful because it's going to simplify nutrition guidance, educating around screen time and mental health, which I'm sure we're going to do an episode on that. Reinforcing the importance of sleep and movement. So all these basics that we talk about all the time, they're very common in our realm. We know these things. These are foundational, but not everyone knows this, right? So this is helpful for anyone who is, goes to this website, looks at the documents, they can read through it. It's a very good guide of like, here's a great place to start. So something as basic as just the dietary guidelines, less than 10% of Americans actually follow them. Well, they probably shouldn't have followed them before, right? But these new ones, this will be helpful for if they're like, because, if they're too complex or they just don't know how to do it or they've never had to eat real food or learn how to shop on the outside of the store, like all these things. So the goal here is just make health information clear, actionable, and realistic for families. I think that part is key.
I love it.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think, too, to kind of maybe simplify it for patients, I know there's a lot of free apps out there, and thanks to AI, Cal AI is one of the most common apps that I've been recommending. You can do a 3-day free trial. And I tell patients, it takes pictures of your food and it's fairly accurate on the calories, the macros. Wow. It's super helpful. So I think just getting an idea of like where are you at from a basic level, understand your daily consumption from the calories, understand the macro consumption, how many grams of fat, carbs, proteins. On average for a 150-pound person, I want them to have minimum 100 grams of protein a day. Okay, so you can it's like, Brittany, do you remember how many grams of protein per day per pound?
It's like 0.8 per kilogram or something.
It's like 0.8 to 1.2 pounds. Yeah. So roughly average about 100 grams. Like my kids, I have a 14-year-old daughter and I want her to be on 75 grams of protein a day. And I want her 11-year-old brother to be on at least 60 grams of protein a day. So I think just bringing the awareness from the Cal AI or like app to do that. But then part 2, I always have a goal of if I'm getting something from my pantry, I want it to have 5 ingredients or less.
Oh, nice.
And I want to be able to read what the ingredients are, not be like, I don't know what
Not
this
try to
word
phonetically
is.
sound it out.
Yeah. So those might be some useful tips. But pillar 4 on this is the partnership. So this portion of it is about aligning the systems that have been historically very disconnected, because right now we have an overlap between healthcare, agriculture, and environmental policy. So all are supposed to be operating separately, even though they have directly impacted each other and oftentimes owned by companies with all the same self-interest. Oftentimes you'll see some of this, the C-suite leaders rotating from, I used to work for this pharmaceutical company and now I work for this agricultural company, or worked for this government organization, and it's that revolving door. So what's a hot topic right now in Iowa is like this Bayer and Monsanto. So Monsanto was bought by Bayer. So Monsanto did the Roundup, the chemical pesticide, now is owned by a pharmaceutical company, Bayer. So they sprayed all this pesticides on all of our food, and they told the EPA it was safe and provided all of these supposed studies that said it was super safe for consumption. That has now been reversed, but now they also own all the oncology and cancer meds for the very thing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so there's a lot of overlap. So this pillar is moving towards being focused on collaboration with the NIH, the USDA, and the EPA, improving food systems at the source and reducing environmental exposures at a population level. And then 2, I do get a chip on my shoulder every time I hear pushback from RFK. And usually when I hear the pushback from people who are not liking RFK's job, his initiative, if you look at his history, he has always been a champion for removing environmental burdens.
Right.
He has never changed or veered. This is not something new that he's being bought and paid for. He is really fighting, and he has been fighting for this for a very long time, and transparency. And so I think we should be embracing it versus questioning why are people pushing against it from a common sense standpoint. But pillar number 5 is about the daily habits. These are the same foundations we talk about with our patients all the time. So again, there's so many things that people can do to not need Brittany and I, to not need to go to the doctor. I love patients that come in and they're like, well, I know I'm not supposed to Google, but I was Googling it, or put this into chat. I salivate over those. I love patients like that. To me, that tells me they're engaged and they care. Yeah. Sometimes they might come in and the information they found created a medical anxiety or unnecessary fear. But, for those patients that don't already have anxiety, I love the researchers. I want them to research and question things I was telling patients 8 years ago. I have since learned might not have been the best information, but I didn't know it at the time. So I appreciate those. But again, whole food, real food, and reducing the ultra processed food. So if you look at your diet and you see that it's super processed, make small changes, small goals. Get on that Cal AI and say, okay, if I'm only getting 30 grams of protein but 300 grams of carbs, my goal next week is to be at 150 grams of carbs and 60 grams. Make small incremental changes by prioritizing the protein, fiber, and nutrient density, and then the movement, supporting that sleep and reducing that toxin exposure where you can, which means like your exposure to plastic. Our big thing is if you're going to microwave, I would love our kids to throw it in the toaster oven, but again, our kids are impatient. But if they're going to throw it in the microwave, put it in a plastic or a glass dish, sort of those things. But these aren't habits that don't just prevent diseases in kids. They help reverse dysfunction in adults. So whether you're a parent or not, or if you feel that your health is so far gone, I promise you, we've seen some people make significant reversals of their health. This guy I had on my books this morning, where he was at 18 months ago, he is healthier now. Like he compares it to like when he was in his 20s.
Yeah.
So people can do that, and that's not a profound period of time considering how much metabolic dysfunction he was at when he arrived.
Well, and I have that testimony. I've known you since 2014 and worked with you on and off through that period, but really committed to that a little over a year ago. And my health and my life has changed significantly in that time by being able to sit down with both of you and have real conversations that matter and being transparent, what good does it do if you don't come in and, really tell the whole story? But, it does matter. And I think people need to hear that. I love that you say make incremental changes because, the idea of just changing your life overnight is too much, and it will just cause people to fall further into the despair they're in rather than see a way out. I do think that for a lot of people listening, you're probably hearing this and you're thinking, it makes sense, but how does it actually apply to me or to my family? And so let's talk about that, Dr. Kala. From what you're seeing clinically, how do these patterns actually show up in real life?
Yeah, so at a population level, and we see it and observe it every day in practice, and kids, we'll hear parents say they're very picky eaters, they have behavior issues, frequent illness, the eczema, the allergies, and then the gut issues like constipation, which, unfortunately has just been normalized, and they feel very confident even giving 18 months old babies Miralax.
Wow.
But so again, these are often treated as separate problems, but in our opinion, they're usually connected. For example, a child with low nutrient intake, high ultra processed foods, and a gut imbalance we're gonna see this very classically. Parents will report that poor focus. Sometimes they'll say teachers are suggesting the ADD, ADHD, the mood swings, and immune issues. And then as the kids get older, then those same patterns shift. So too, what happens then, like that's, either untreated learning disabilities as well. So then we're seeing that academically in performance. In teens, then we'll see that fatigue, weight gain, hormone imbalances, anxiety, depression, and poor sleep. So our teens will be handed birth controls, for these. The weight gain, they're going to get the advice, just eat less and exercise more. Or they'll be put on stimulants because of the fatigue. And so oftentimes too, they're treated separately. So they're getting the medication. So when we get patients and parents that are willing to do the work, we always encourage, like, if this is what the kid is like, I'm sure the adults kind of match and is similar. So our big thing is like making healthy contagious. So when we set a kid up, we encourage the parents to go on the same diet as well. We've had moms come in to say that they want to test all of their, they have 4 kids and they want to test the mom and all 4 kids on the food intolerance. We will try to talk her down to say, Mom, we're going to test you, and then which is the sickest or the most symptomatic child. Then we're going to go based on them. But again, all comes down to like this metabolic dysfunction, even in patients that appear supposedly healthy. So these these issues don't start in adulthood, they build over time. So usually we'll address the diet either by doing food sensitivity or doing an elimination diet. Brittany, you're the one that works with the kids most often. Would you say that you see results in the first 30 days from parents self-reported?
Absolutely. And back to like you were talking about like constipation being normalized. Oh, that's one of the main symptoms I have of kids coming in. Like they're just like, oh, they're constipated and they don't even realize it because I bring out my nice little chart of the Bristol stools and I'm like, what's your kid's number? And they're like, oh, and like they're clearly constipated. They're like, and they go, it's several days in between. And they've talked to their primary care about it and they're like, oh yeah, that's just must be normal for them. And I'm like, this is not normal. Like we are definitely having some issues here. A lot of times a lot of kiddos have very high dairy, especially like the toddlers that come to see me. They like drinking like, 40 ounces of milk plus a day. Oh, wow. Like they just, they wean off their formula or their breast milk and then they just start pounding the milk. And so we eliminate from that diet, their constipation improves. And like within 30 days, for sure, most of these people are like having some very dramatic changes in their symptoms.
That's awesome.
Well, and I think too, the biggest hurdle, like what I would always like, I almost like it just encourage and then even like pray over the adults because they really kind of surrender. They're like, no, you don't understand. They won't eat anything else. And I know that can be really highly stressful as a parent myself. But then too, it's like we need to not offer what we know that they shouldn't have, that it's like, okay, you can have this chicken, piece of broccoli or piece of steak. What would you like to have it in? And they're like, I want the chicken nugget, to like not even offer the chicken nugget, to be like, well, this is what we're having. Because a kid will eat when hungry. And sometimes is what's happening. It's their brain hijacking and it's an emotional fuel. Their body is asking, I want the sugar, I want the carb. And so sometimes it's like we need the temporary pain of the tantrum that we have to overcome. And it's uncomfortable. But majority of time when parents, especially when they're both on board, it's a very quick change. And then the kid starts craving the healthier fuel. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's awesome. I think that, this conversation is so important for people to have because, we've for so many years found ourselves really in that gray zone where the information was hard to come by and we're not sure, how to change the, life practices that we've engaged in. And I just think it's a really helpful way to connect all of the dots because it takes this from just being a report or a plan. I love this MAHA picture, to something that people can actually recognize in their own life. You don't need to do everything all at once. Again, I love start with one habit. Maybe that's swapping out one processed food, improving breakfast, getting outside daily, and I would even suggest multiple times a day, prioritizing sleep, because health, it's built in small, consistent choices. And if this episode was helpful, we'd really love it if you shared it with somebody in your life, especially a parent or a member of your family. Said earlier, we're going to link both reports in the show notes if you want to go deeper in this, and I encourage that you do. As we wrap up, just remember, your body isn't broken. It's incredibly well designed. And when we start removing the things that interfere and start supporting the body the way that it's created to function, it does amazing things. We truly believe that health is something God designed into us, and our role is to steward that well. So start small this week. Change one habit, one small change, one build, and see where it goes from there. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us today on Whole Health. If you'd like to learn more about our program, have a question for our hosts, or want to find past episodes, just head to wholehealthlive.com.